The NFL has seen so many rivalries throughout the years, but few have blown up in the way that the Seahawks and 49ers did. Part of that was because of individual rivalries, part of it was from overlapping success, and all of it was fuel for more secret-based content than any rivalry has ever given us. So we're here to relive all that. Let's start with the two guys that might have single-handedly kicked all this off. Jim Harbaugh and Pete Carroll brought their feud from college to the pros and built teams in their likeness, part of which being their shared hatred. Here's Alex with the story of their beef.
Jim Harbaugh and Pete Carroll are each maniacally competitive football coaches who share similar philosophies about the sport at their core, and they have never been able to escape one another. Let's take it back and start during Harbaugh's playing days. After a decorated collegiate career at Michigan, he went to the Bears in the first round of the 1987 draft. He'd go on to have a nice career, earning the moniker Captain Comeback along the way. And one of his very first comebacks happened to occur in 1991 with the Jets in town, his first game against a defense coordinated by Pete Carroll. Down 7 on the final play of regulation, Harbaugh connected with Neil Anderson to send the game to OT before sneaking in from a yard out for the win. Harbaugh ripped Carroll's heart out in the waning minutes a few years later, too, the former now in Indy, the latter running the 49ers defense. And in 1997, we even got a year of him in the same division after Bob Kraft hired Carroll as head coach in New England, where Carroll got a measure of revenge with the Pats sweeping their 2 games against Harbaugh's Colts. A few years later, Carroll was coaching in college at USC, where he quickly turned them into a national powerhouse, while Harbaugh was getting into coaching himself after wrapping up his playing career. His first head gig came in San Diego, where in 2006, he actually tried recruiting Carroll's son, Nate. He chose USC. By 2007, these long-lost loves were reunited in the Pac-10 when Stanford hired Harbaugh to turn around a 1-11 program. And the jabs came not long after, with Harbaugh claiming that March that the upcoming season would be the final one for Carroll in Southern California. Carroll didn't take too kindly to that. Their first meeting featured Harbaugh leading his woeful team that had lost 16 of their previous 18 games into the Coliseum against the mighty Trojans, who were ranked number 2 in the country and had won their previous 35 home games. USC was favored by over 40 points, but they were holding on for dear life in the final minutes with a 6-point lead. Harbaugh's knack for late-game heroics didn't disappear after trading a helmet, jersey, and cleats for a Sharpie, khakis, and, well, cleats. On their last gasp drive, Stanford faced a 4th and 20 before a young wide receiver by the name of Richard Sherman miraculously kept their hopes alive. This last-minute 4th and goal touchdown punctuated one of the greatest upsets in the history of college football and put the Harbaugh-Carroll rivalry squarely on the map. The next year, USC was able to flex their muscles in Stanford, and a fourth-quarter surge propelled them to a blowout 22-point win over Harbaugh's Cardinal. But enough with the appetizers. The stage is now set for their final Pac-10 showdown in 2009, and the sweet aroma of beef that would smother the Los Angeles Coliseum at the end. By now, Harbaugh had turned around Stanford's fortunes, and, now armed with a star quarterback, they absolutely clobbered USC. Late in the game, after it was totally out of hand, a Stanford touchdown put him up 48-21, but Harbaugh really wanted that 50 and went for 2. He didn't get it, but boy did that piss off Pete. After the game, as they approached each other at midfield to shake hands, Harbaugh delighted in silencing USC and their fans, and Carroll was still steaming from that 2-point attempt, so he had a little something to say to Harbaugh. What's your deal? The utterance of those 3 little words was a magical moment for fans of football, or just pettiness. At the end of that season, with sanctions headed USC's way due to NCAA violations under Carroll's watch, Pete just so happened to decide that that was the right point in time to jump back to the NFL, reaching a deal with the Seattle Seahawks. 1 year and a BCS Bowl win later, in January 2011, Harbaugh was the hottest coaching commodity out there, with teams falling over themselves to try and land him. Dolphins owner and fellow Wolverine Stephen Ross, one of the wealthiest in a club of stupidly wealthy people, was basically offering Harbaugh a blank check to come to Miami. And he still had a head coach in place. But the Dolphins didn't face Carroll's Seahawks twice per year. The 49ers did, and that really mattered to Harbaugh, who went out of his way to tell CEO Jed York that he was ready to beat Carroll again. So he jumped to the NFL but stayed in the Bay, joining old Pete in the NFC West for a biannual renewal of acquaintances, and, of course, more beef. As luck would have it, Harbaugh didn't have to wait long for his chance, beating Carroll in his debut as an NFL coach before knocking Seattle out of playoff contention on Christmas Eve. And yet, outside of a couple very closely scrutinized post-game handshakes, 2011 was uneventful by their standards. But everything changed in 2012. The team's first matchup of the year occurred on a Thursday night in Week 7. 4 days earlier, Seattle had announced to the world that they were for real when they knocked off the Patriots in rookie quarterback Russell Wilson's coming out party. And a common theme between these two squads, it was a 60-minute defensive struggle, and the Niners held on for the win. Eventually, a rumor started to percolate that after this game, Harbaugh had driven by Seattle's team bus as they were departing Candlestick Park and proceeded to honk and wave and troll Carroll and the Seahawks, an accusation that Harbaugh vehemently denied. The next day, even though he just won their game, Harbaugh waged an assault against the way Carroll coached his secondary, threatening to take it up with the league office. Carroll made sure to point out just how outrageous he found that. Fast forward 9 weeks to December 23rd, which also just so happened to be Harbaugh's 49th birthday. The Niners hit the Pacific Northwest to take on the Seahawks in a cold, wet, primetime game with huge NFC West implications. Let's give this game a bit of a backdrop. The Seahawks had just clinched their first winning season in a half-decade, were firing on all cylinders, and had just become the first team since Truman was in office to drop 50 points in back-to-back games. But what's funny is how they managed to reach that mark the previous week in a game up in Canada. The man furious with Harbaugh for needlessly going for two to hit 50 points, dialed up this fake punt in the fourth quarter with a 30-point lead and on the doorstep of, wait for it, 50 points. If that's not the pot calling the kettle black, then we just need to wipe that idiom from the face of the planet. Meanwhile, the Niners limped into this one, coming off an emotionally draining game in Foxborough in which they played over 90 defensive snaps and saw the heartbeat of their team tear his triceps. So this would be his first missed game in over a decade, just as the young upstart Seahawks were nipping at the Niners' heels for NFC West supremacy. And Seattle took advantage, setting the tone for the evening on just their second offensive play.
Justin Smith out of the lineup. The Seahawks go right after his replacement, Ricky Jean-Francois, and they stick it in from there.
Yeah, after that alleged disrespect from the parking lot in October, the Seahawks were kind of foaming at the mouth for this one. Now, there was nothing physically Carroll's team could do to Harbaugh, even if cornerback Brandon Browner really wanted to. But they could sure as hell smack around his team, and for 60 minutes, they physically manhandled the Niners. And hell yeah, Carroll and the Hawks enjoyed rubbing it in Harbaugh's face, especially on his birthday. The 2013 offseason arrived a bit later, but this beef takes no offseason. The Seahawks, who'd been having a host of players getting popped for PEDs, were ripe for a June tongue-lashing from Harbaugh, who stressed being above reproach while intimating that Seattle's success was due to cheating. As you could imagine, Carroll wasn't too fond of Harbaugh commenting about his team. Heading into that 2013 season, the rivalry was white hot, and after splitting with each other in the regular season, it all came to a head in a battle royale of an NFC Championship game up in Seattle. After Harbaugh's former player Richard Sherman sealed the game at the end, he lit into his old college coach on national TV.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game. When you try me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're going to get.
The next year was a mess in San Francisco. Harbaugh was being pushed out the door by ego-driven Niner management all season, and upon its conclusion, the two sides mutually parted ways. Harbaugh returned to his alma mater to coach, but even then, the sweet smell of this beef never ventures too far. In the third round of the 2017 NFL Draft, Carroll actually picked a couple players Harbaugh had coached in Ann Arbor. Let's go to the tape to see if there are any beef remnants when that was mentioned.
Coach Harbaugh does a great job.
Yeah, what's your deal, man?
Carroll and Harbaugh may never square off against one another again, and this would be a shame for so many reasons. The excellent football each coach brings out of his team, the drama, the antics, the pure tension in the air. But even if we've seen the final handshake between these two men, we'll always have the memories of their long-lasting, grade A beef.
We got into it at the tail end of that, but the moment where this feud was truly first fully on display and forced everyone to take note deserves a deep rewind. Here's a complete story of what led us to that end zone interaction between Sherman and Crabtree.
It's January 19th, 2014. We're in Seattle, Washington for the NFC Championship game between the hometown Seahawks and the San Francisco 49ers. The Niners have the ball, down 6, and are 18 yards away from taking the lead. Clock ticking towards 30 seconds, Seattle is looking to keep them out of the end zone and punch their own ticket to the Super Bowl. To appreciate what comes next and remember the hate-filled journey that got us here, we should rewind. Okay, so first things first. See this guy? He hates this guy. And him? Well, he really doesn't like this guy. And we'll come back to these two guys, but they definitely don't get along. Why though? In 2002, Seattle changed conferences, joining the 49ers in the NFC West. Both on the lookout for a fresh rival, these newfound division mates agreed to regularly disagree pretty early on, but it took nearly a decade before their pot actually boiled over. When the Seahawks joined the NFC, Pete Carroll was busy turning USC into a powerhouse. Multiple national championships, 7 straight conference titles, and one big thorn in his side, a thorn named Jim Harbaugh. Harbaugh's Stanford program became the David to USC's Goliath. The Cardinal ended USC's perfect season in 2007, one of the biggest upsets in college football history. 2 years later, Harbaugh was out for blood, actively running up the score in a Stanford blowout, which led to this very awkward post-game handshake. Nice comeback, Jim. These dudes did not get along. So when Carroll left for a new gig in 2010, and a year later, Harbaugh had the chance to join him in the same division, he jumped at the opportunity to beat Carroll once again. These coaches immediately ramped up this divisional rivalry. There's a good chance that they could have fueled it on their own, but a critical piece came from how they built their teams. They had pretty similar visions. Both guys wanted to rely on a power running game, and they had the backs to do it. They beefed up offensive lines capable of paving the way and keeping their young, mobile QBs upright. They had chain movers in the passing game, capable of blowing up any given week. But for the most part, that wasn't necessary thanks to the play on the other side of the ball. Each team ran through a defense that set the tone every week and catapulted both franchises straight into contention. That last part became massive for this rivalry. Bad teams can enjoy playing spoiler to good teams, sure, but when you have 2 talented rosters directly competing for the same goal in the same division at the same time, then you're cooking. San Francisco took extreme pleasure in knocking Seattle out of playoff contention in 2011. There were even rumors of Harbaugh gloating while Seahawks players watched from their team bus. Easy claim for Harbaugh to deny, but then when you give out quotes like this, it's hard to act like you're not dumping fuel on the rivalry in broad daylight. So we have spicy quotes, coaches who don't get along, and then in 2012, it happened. Both teams made the playoffs in the same season for the first time since 1988. That meant that even with San Francisco's eventual Super Bowl appearance, the NFC West was guaranteed to no one in 2013. Jumping back to tonight, here in Seattle, you know how the division played out. And if this score holds, the hometown crowd will watch their Seahawks take the 49ers' place in this year's big game. But if there's anyone who could change that in these closing seconds, it's this guy. When San Francisco drafted Colin Kaepernick 36th overall in 2011, experts saw a talented quarterback prospect with great physical traits who was raw as hell. Sure, he made up for that with his legs, but for success in the pros, he needed some work. Cap landed in the perfect spot for that. Not only could he lean on Harbaugh, the QB whisperer, but he sat behind Alex Smith, a cerebral signal caller who made up for a lesser-than arm with high IQ and some sneaky athleticism. For 18 months, Kaepernick learned and he waited, and then the injury gods intervened. Week 10, 2012, Kaepernick came in for a concussed Smith. Considering the circumstances, he played pretty well. Not a gaudy performance, but he did enough to battle back and tie things up at the end of regulation. Then marched them in position to win it in overtime, only for David Akers to spoil the ending. A week later, in his first career start, things went far better. This came against one of the league's best defenses, therefore making it easier for Harbaugh to stick with Kaepernick despite Smith being cleared. While Smith's play made that decision look like a head-scratcher, any potential quarterback controversy was squashed in Week 12. Kaepernick's toolset took this offense to a different level and offered another way to grind games out on the ground. It paid off pretty well for San Francisco, like in a record-breaking sort of way. Kaepernick nearly even claimed the Lombardi Trophy for the Niners, but fell as short as one could against the Ravens. And maybe against the referees, but that's not our story. Our story is this 2013 version of San Francisco. Kaepernick propelled himself into preseason MVP conversations. The expectations surrounding his squad felt reminiscent of Niners teams from decades past. Opening the year with a rematch from last postseason, Kaepernick only fanned those flames. He showed his smarts by leaning on Vernon Davis. The explosive tight end has thrived with Kaepernick throwing him the ball, which led to Davis's first ever All-Pro season. The QB's favorite target, though, has been newcomer Anquan Boldin. Their connection has been major on its own, but even more so when remembering that the receiver room operated at less than full strength the majority of the year. Michael Crabtree, the team's leading receiver in 2012, who showed great rapport with Kaepernick down the stretch and throughout the playoffs, needed offseason surgery that shelved him for the team's first 11 games. Now, they did fine without him, but once Crabtree hit the field in Week 13, the Niners have been undefeated ever since. Correlation, causation, who knows? The point is, Kaepernick has all of his key playmakers. They carried that momentum into Lambeau, where they beat Aaron Rodgers for a fourth time in a row. Then, a week later, traveled to Carolina, and the defense put the clamps on Cam Newton. Winning every way possible, they've become the hottest team left standing. And right here, they're in position to steal this game. Kaepernick's got plenty of options in this moment, but if he decides to look Crabtree's way down here, well, then he'll also be looking in this guy's direction, which hasn't been too smart this year. In 2011, no one could have predicted that Richard Sherman would become the face of the Seahawks defense, or the mouth of the whole team. 153 players heard their names called in the NFL draft before the Seahawks took Sherman. The fact cornerback remained a somewhat new position for him might explain Sherman lasting that long, but if you ask him, you'd hear a different answer for why he dropped in the draft. Spoiler, these guys don't like each other. Surely there's a video about that somewhere. In just his second year, Sherman showed why the 31 other teams made a big mistake. That first team All-Pro season showcased more than just his talent. The front office had been crushing it with draft picks. That's how Carroll and Schneider remade this defense overnight, finding heavy hitters and ball hawks and assembling a secondary that became known as the Legion of Boom. That nickname quickly spread to the rest of their defense, a collection of players who all played football as if their lives depended on it. Some had pedigrees like Earl Thomas, but most were like Sherman, passed over round after round. Malcolm Smith, for instance, landed in Seattle as a 7th-round pick, and played behind unstoppable linebackers like KJ Wright and Bobby Wagner. But when injuries thrust Smith into a starting spot, he immediately delivered. During a pivotal stretch of this 2013 season, Smith filled in for Wright with performances that proved how deep the defense's talent ran. As a whole, they pulled off a regular season the league has rarely seen. They demoralized offenses and reminded old heads of the '85 Chicago Bears, one of the greatest football teams ever. Oh, and naturally, Sherman played a major part in that. The defense drove this team on an incredible ride, delivering Seattle its best season since the last time they reached the Super Bowl. After their first-round bye, the defense kept Drew Brees and the high-powered New Orleans offense off the scoreboard until the fourth quarter. When Marshawn Lynch dealt the final kill shot, we were gifted with a third battle between these division rivals. And tonight, Seattle's needed the defense to be at their best. On the first snap of the game, the Seahawks gifted the Niners a short field. But that D didn't break. Well, not at that point. Few have contained Kaepernick for a full 60 minutes this season. In the 49ers' first drive of the second quarter, he delivered again. As the Seahawks pressured Cap, QB looked like a gazelle evading lions. He took a perfect angle to bust loose, then bounded for 58 yards before running out of gas and succumbing to Cam Chancellor. The next 10 yards proved much harder to pick up. but the Niners punched it in on 4th down to take a big 10-point lead. Despite Seattle's defense calling out for help, the offense didn't wake up until the 3rd quarter. With a game plan revolving around feed Marshawn, it finally paid off. After that, it was Russell Wilson's turn to cook. 13 yards to Doug Baldwin, 15 to Zach Miller, then finally a 35-yard score to Jermaine Kearse. That kicked off a reckless 4th quarter. On the ensuing drive, Cliff Averill looped all the way around and chopped Kaepernick's arm. Michael Bennett nearly had himself a Piesman moment, but at least set the Seahawks offense in great position. 4 snaps later, though, it was Wilson's turn to cough it up. While unscathed on the scoreboard, that micro drive saw 49ers all-world linebacker Navarro Bowman crumble down with a brutal knee injury. And so after Kaepernick turned the ball back over 2 snaps later, Seattle's offense faced a San Francisco D without their leader. They burned some clock, drove as far as they could, then made this a 6-point game, forcing the Niners to need a touchdown. But if they get that here, they're an extra point away from a 2nd straight Super Bowl appearance. While this hasn't been his finest hour, Kaepernick has still stacked more magic on an already magical season, and can now deliver in the clutch once again. With Harbaugh, this team is on a path to glory that hasn't been seen in San Francisco since the 90s. That said, Seattle knows the stakes. They know what they need to do, and they've done it all season. They're on the cusp of their first Super Bowl appearance since 2006, and eyeing the first Lombardi Trophy in franchise history. Oh, plus the bragging rights from tonight will be pretty sweet. No matter what, though, it all starts with this play. Welcome to a moment in history.
Colin Kaepernick with a chance to take the lead. Kaepernick, end zone, Crabtree, broken up, picked off! This game is over! Knocked in the air, intercepted by Smith, off the hands of Richard Sherman.
This became the moment everyone pointed to for defining our team's rivalry, with Sherman in particular being a focal point. But even for him, this feud had origins much earlier on, which ended up bleeding into his feelings for a few key characters in San Francisco. So here's back-to-back beefs with Sherman front and center.
Richard Sherman's beef with Jim Harbaugh started at college, graduated to the NFL, and had a larger impact than any of us knew at the time. Oh, the power of pettiness and spite. It took a while for the Richard Sherman we now know to come into view, but in a lot of ways he was shaped by Jim Harbaugh. Before he was a Super Bowl winning all-pro shutdown corner, Sherman was a wide receiver. Granted, he was a receiver on an inept Stanford offense that sometimes made him look like the defender he'd become, but a receiver nonetheless. It wasn't a great team, nor had it been, so at the end of Sherman's freshman year, his path crossed with Harbaugh's for the first time. And initially, the pair felt like a good fit. Sherman being a dedicated, tough kid on a mission to win, and Harbaugh, the proud Michigan man who never hid the fact that he didn't really have any plans other than football and death. He wanted to win, he wanted to put in the work needed to win, and he wanted players who would do the same. So that's great. Just a couple of guys passionate about football, looking to win at whatever cost. I'm sure they'll see eye to eye. Through their first 8 games together, Stanford tripled their win total from a year earlier. They pulled off a major upset of number 2 USC and a face that we'll see more of later on. Sherman was once again the team's top receiver. And then the hiccups began. Against Washington, Sherman's emotions overflowed on the sideline, which was picked up by cameras as he shouted and shoved teammates. As a result, Harbaugh suspended Sherman for their next game. Once he returned, he had just 1 catch for 5 yards over their final 2 games. He still finished as the team's leading receiver, but the last month led to him looking for a major change. He wanted to flip sides, but offensive coordinator David Shaw said he was too valuable. Unfortunately, a lingering patellar tendon injury meant neither offense nor defense got him. After hobbling through the first 4 games of 2008, he went under the knife and declared his season over. The fun bit he seemed to have forgotten to run that by Harbaugh first. Talking to the media, the head coach was questioned about Sherman's health, and Harbaugh said he had thought they'd have him still, but didn't read the receiver's Facebook for medical updates. Once away from the microphones, Harbaugh tackled the matter by telling Sherman he had given up on his teammates by having the surgery. Out with an injury, on the outs with his head coach, Sherman again went to Shaw and asked for a change. Given the circumstances, which included Harbaugh allegedly banishing him from the offense, this time the request was approved. Once news got out, Harbaugh noted that he wasn't sure Sherman could beat out even the guys at the bottom of the depth chart. Maybe Coach knew what he was doing, maybe he got lucky, but those words made sure Sherman was fired up. He dominated the offseason, shot up the depth chart, and admittedly was somewhat aided by knowing the offense inside and out. He would call out plays pre-snap, or just walk over to where the route would take the receiver and make an easy interception. Harbaugh, to no surprise, did not approve. But by the time the 2009 season came around, with Sherman starting at corner, regardless of the path traveled, they got to the right place. And the pair looked pretty happy with the results, which included an Orange Bowl demolition of Virginia Tech to cap off 2010. Then, 1 week later, Harbaugh was gone, off to the 49ers with a trail of peak Harbaugh quotes to mark the path. And that April presented the biggest weekend in terms of beef implications. With Harbaugh already in the NFL, Sherman came to join him. San Francisco happened to need corners, and obviously Harbaugh had a pretty good feel for one in particular, which meant they went a different route. Even though San Francisco had a third-round grade on Sherman, which Niners CEO Jed York revealed much later on, there was no chance Sherman would have gotten a call from the Niners because Harbaugh had taken him off their draft board entirely. He'd hear his name during the 5th round, but it was a slide that made Sherman believe his former coach hadn't been doing him any favors when talking to other teams. There were rumors of something like this happening at the time, but the fun part of this beef is it would take years for all the details to come out, or for people like Jed York to offer the bits that fully painted the picture. Whether or not Harbaugh said anything that hurt Sherman's value, there are 2 clear facts. First, there were 24 cornerbacks taken before Sherman, and second, when he was selected at 154 overall, he landed in the best possible spot. Not only had he studied the corner techniques coached by Pete Carroll as he learned the position, but he also got a new coach who had beef with his old coach. Carroll's history with Harbaugh was well documented, same with their personality differences. So while Sherman's college days were somewhat stifling to his personality, that wouldn't be the case in Seattle. He was in a place where he could be himself, and when Sherman got to be himself, the beef got to bloom. His rookie season, most of the focus was understandably put on Harbaugh and Carroll. But as the secondary embraced their new Legion of Boom moniker going into the 2012 season, Sherman stole back some of the spotlight. After their Week 7 showdown in which the 49ers eked out a defensive win, Harbaugh still spoke out about the physical play of Seattle's secondary, going so far as to say he'd talked to the league about it. Sherman's response gave a glimpse to his feelings on Harbaugh, calling him a bully, which the coach kind of backed up after the game. Harbaugh celebrated his team's win by driving around the parking lot and honking at the Seahawks team buses, offering a mock salute according to Sherman and his fellow Stanford alum Doug Baldwin. Considering that showboating happened after a 13-6 win, it feels like a possible lapse in judgment, especially with the power of hindsight. Sherman began to work into the conversations about the league's top corners. He nicknamed himself Optimus Prime, then immediately shut Megatron down. He had a 2-interception day against Arizona, plus his first career touchdown. And then, Seattle welcomed Harbaugh to town for a pretty important Week 16 contest that turned into a one-sided affair. Sherman notched his 7th interception on the season, but even bigger than that, put a second-quarter nail in the coffin by returning a blocked field goal 90 yards to make it 21-0. It got so bad that Sherman was even trying to get Carroll to chase Seattle's 3rd straight 50-point game. His coach declined, though, telling Sherman they had more class than that. But after the game, the corner needed to pour a little more salt in the wound. During his post-game interview on the field, he wished his old coach a happy birthday. which on one hand was sweet of him to remember, and on the other, this was Sherman using a national broadcast to honk back. But he had plenty to celebrate. Not only had they won the game, but Sherman also won his appeal of a 4-game suspension the NFL had thrown his way earlier that season. Having him helped Seattle's chances come the playoffs, and we were actually so close to getting a third Niners-Seahawks matchup on an even grander stage, but Atlanta's last-second field goal meant it wouldn't be. Instead, on his second attempt in as many years, Harbaugh took his team to the Super Bowl. And although they lost, those first 2 years were a little lopsided football-wise. San Francisco had won 3 of the 4 head-to-head matchups. They'd made the NFC Championship game each year, came so close to a Lombardi trophy, and then that offseason, everything cranked the f*** up. Harbaugh spoke out about the suspensions in the Seahawks secondary and encouraged them to play by the rules, really putting on his Michigan hat to do so. Sherman tried to distance himself a bit from Harbaugh with his response, a path drastically different from the one his teammate Brandon Browner took. But speaking to SI, it was Sherman's father who really stoked the flames by describing his son's relationship with Harbaugh as a passionate hate. As more and more quotes came out in the open, the duo was under a bit more of a microscope, especially when they faced off, which brings us to week 2 of 2013. Sherman snagged a pick, Harbaugh's offense only managed a field goal, and Seattle cruised. But the highlight of the night came after the game when Sherman sprinted after Harbaugh as he left the field, slapped him on the butt, then ran away as Harbaugh sorta kinda acknowledged the PDA. This then sent 1,000 ships sailing into the night, all carrying various takes. Here's where I'll note that while Sherman does have valid grievances against Harbaugh, he also has a gift for crafting narratives that might be slightly flawed, not unlike a wrestling promoter. But since he's not a wrestling promoter, he then has to walk them back. When asked about the butt slap after the game, the corner said that Harbaugh essentially blew him off. In his mind, the attempted sportsmanship went unanswered. Harbaugh said that he had offered his congratulations, and just wasn't totally sure who was patting his butt at that moment. If nothing else, he played nice in the media and didn't stir the pot. Sherman, when further clarifying, recounted the events as if he was at a deposition. So, maybe not a big deal. Maybe both sides had matured and this had been overblown from the start. I mean, that same season, Sherman said he didn't hate anyone. He was simply passionate, and when it came to the 49ers, he might not like them, but it's not like that's some wild statement considering they're division rivals. The actual wild statement would come not long after. His "it's passion, not hate" quote was part of the lead up to the 2013 NFC Championship game. In what became a very close contest, the climactic moment came as Colin Kaepernick looked for Michael Crabtree on what could have been the game-winning touchdown. But Sherman made an incredible play on the ball, popped it up and into the hands of Malcolm Smith. And as his teammates gathered around, Sherman celebrated in the end zone, then sprinted over to Crabtree and offered a handshake. Sherman continued his tour with a choking motion aimed at the 49ers sideline, which all paved the way for a legendary postgame interview with Aaron Andrews where Sherman showed humility and gratitude and...
Well, I'm the best corner in the game. When you try me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're gonna get. Don't you ever talk about me.
But no one listened to him, myself included. We all had to talk about him. Despite making the play that sent the Seahawks to the Super Bowl, Sherman quickly went into apology mode, saying he never meant to distract from the team and what they accomplished as a unit. His feud with Crabtree stole the show for a bit as more details came out, like how they had got into it during a charity softball game during the summer. And while he did name Crabtree specifically in his rant, it took away from his message. The outburst was aimed at his old coach. His dislike, any ill will for the Niners, it started and ended with Harbaugh. A lot went down between the post-game rant and that quote, which came out in 2020 ahead of the 49ers Super Bowl appearance. By then, the corner was capping off his second season in the Bay, and everyone continued to say, hey, isn't it wild how Sherman used to not like the Niners, but now he's on the Niners? So it made some sense that talk focused on Harbaugh. But he offered a lot more details than one would have expected, considering they hadn't faced off in the better part of a decade. The beefiest revelation was that Sherman had been on a mission to force Harbaugh out of the league. And before York and Sherman officially teamed up in San Francisco, they had essentially worked together to fulfill Sherman's dream. After he ended the Niners season, and then after he did what Harbaugh hadn't by winning a Super Bowl, the narrative around the coach shifted a bit. He did what no one had ever done by making a conference championship game in each of his first 3 seasons as head coach. And yet, rumors arose that even a Super Bowl victory in 2014 wouldn't be enough to save his job. York quickly tried to shut those rumors down, but details were coming to the surface. An internal power struggle between Harbaugh and GM Trent Baalke had made it so the coach's days were numbered. And after they missed the playoffs, the Niners said they had mutually agreed to part ways. Harbaugh would later say that wasn't completely accurate, but the deed was done. And to return to Sherman's quote about ousting his former coach, once he'd done that, he was cool. Harbaugh quickly returned to the college ranks where his unique approach could truly shine. But to his credit, without Harbaugh, the 2015 NFL season had something lacking. Harbaugh had gotten his teams to buy into a hatred for the Seahawks, one he actively helped cultivate. Unfortunately, he was going against someone who was driven by something similar, yet even more personal. Harbaugh had lit a fire under Sherman, one that the corner seemed to fan as much as he wanted, or possibly as much as he needed to for motivation. Over the years, it came into and out of focus, depending on who was in the news. It was found in 2 competitive individuals, both capable of extreme pettiness, driven by success. And then at a certain point, each side decided they had cooked the shit out of this piece of beef, and it was best left in the trash where no one would attempt to salvage a damn thing. Michael Crabtree and Richard Sherman had a unique beef. It was brisk, yet it lingered. It was highly publicized, but not fully understood. It had ties to an incredible rivalry, ties to one of their coaches, and to a charity softball game. You know, normal stuff. Most stories have an inciting incident that hooks the audience and sets the main characters off on a journey. For Richard Sherman and Michael Crabtree, that incident seemed to be the 2014 NFC Championship game. Sherman made a huge play at Crabtree's expense. They shared a moment in the end zone, and then Sherman bombastically spewed his thoughts for everyone to hear about Crabtree.
When you try me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're gonna get.
And about himself.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game.
On a major stage, the audience witnessed the stories of this pair intertwine. It propelled countless ships to sail off into the night, excited by all the possibilities that could unfold from this seemingly newfound beef. But we all soon realized that we had actually shown up late to this story. The presumed inciting incident may have actually been the climactic moment, which left us scrambling to uncover all the personal details of these individuals because it's unfair if we don't know why this beef tastes so good. So let's do a little stage setting. The 49ers drafted Crabtree 10th overall in 2009. The wide receiver struggled to live up to that billing for the first few seasons, but his fortunes began to change in 2011. Jim Harbaugh came on as head coach, and things got serious. Like most wins since their last NFC Championship game appearance serious. Harbaugh also brought a bit of beef with him, including one with his former player at Stanford, Richard Sherman, which would impact things for Crabtree. Sherman reached the NFL at the same time as Harbaugh, but with a little less fanfare. He quickly began to outplay his 5th-round draft price, though, and helped establish the Legion of Boom. Sherman was a physical corner on a stacked secondary, primed to terrorize the league for years to come. Now, this isn't Harbaugh's story, but in a way, the bad blood he had with Sherman helped lay a foundation for today's duo. Sherman entered the league with a chip on his shoulder, something that he blamed Harbaugh for by giving him poor performance reviews ahead of the draft. But considering one party is on the field while the other is on the sideline, it paved the way for some tangential beef. As of this moment, it's generally frowned upon for a player to physically go after an opposing coach, so the 49er players that Sherman faced would have to serve as the physical outlet for any of the cornerback's frustrations. It would make sense that if one of those receivers happened to be a former first-round pick like Crabtree, they might receive a little extra heat, regardless of any additional reasons for ill will, which, well, we're getting there. But in Sherman's first couple of seasons, the 49ers were a couple steps ahead of Seattle. The Seahawks were definitely closing the gap, but for San Francisco, not only had they made the NFC Championship game in Harbaugh's first year, a season later, they reached the Super Bowl. And Crabtree played a major part in that, easily having a career year. He nearly even brought the Lombardi Trophy back to San Francisco, but some questionably physical play from Baltimore went unnoticed. Thankfully for Crabtree, if there's ever been a cure for the heartache of losing a Super Bowl, it's softball. Now, we can safely assume Larry Fitzgerald had perfectly good intentions when he invited Crabtree and Sherman to play in his charity event. However, he accidentally created a space for their beef introduction. There are a handful of accounts for how things went down during that 2013 offseason. Some anonymous sources say that Sherman rolled up, said hello to everyone around Crabtree, offered a handshake, which the receiver declined, and then Sherman tried to fight him. Others told a similar chain of events just after Crabtree declined the handshake, he wanted to start a fight. The most in-depth report came from Willie McGinnis. Not saying this is the most accurate, just that it paints a more complete picture. Apparently, there had been some trash talk previously between the pair, which Crabtree hadn't forgotten about. Because of that, he had no intention of being cordial. After declining the handshake, Crabtree kept talking, things got a little heated, and Sherman didn't back down, but wanted a non-charity-centric setting for whatever would come next. So basically, everyone agreed that a handshake had been refused, and they nearly fought. But seeing as how they'd face off twice in the regular season, while likely vying for the top spot in the division, there would be plenty of time to reheat the beef. The fun part, though, came a few days later, when Crabtree tore his Achilles. Okay, maybe fun is the wrong word, but here's my point. Crabtree missed significant time, and therefore, they had to bottle up that animosity. And once Crabtree returned in December of 2013, a shift had taken place between the teams. Seattle sat in the driver's seat for the division, so with the 49ers needing to make up ground, when the teams faced off in Week 14, individual matchups weren't the focus for our beefers. The most notable thing from this showdown was that the 49ers won. It was one of 6 straight wins to go into the playoffs pretty hot. From there, they snuck by the Packers, cruised past the Panthers, and for the third time in as many years, found themselves playing for a trip to the Super Bowl. Their opponents this time? Imagine that. Everyone saw the potential for fireworks, but no one truly knew how big the fireworks could be, especially since they continued to not speak directly about the other. But then, the moment. A close, raucous game came down to the final seconds. San Francisco needed 6 to tie, 7 to win. With 30 seconds left from the 18, Colin Kaepernick went for it all on first down and looked Crabtree's way, which also meant he looked Sherman's way. The corner batted the ball up into the air, Malcolm Smith grabbed it, and the Seahawks snuffed out the threat. Then, the beef came into view. Sherman chased down a dejected Crabtree and offered his hand. Crabtree offered his hand in return, but to Sherman's face. If you're feeling sorry for Sherman that his handshakes keep getting rejected, well, don't worry about him. After a few Russell Wilson kneel-downs, the cameras found Sherman. First, Fox Deportes simply said, "Hey, you guys did it." To which Sherman responded with a level of intensity that makes me question his understanding of what microphones do.
Hey, you don't try the best corner in the league in the crunch, especially with a mediocre receiver like Crabtree. He's weak.
He then went and gave a more publicized interview with Aaron Andrews. Sherman restated his feelings about himself.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game.
His feelings about a certain opponent.
With a sorry receiver like Crabtree.
But he added an extra layer to things. He said, "Don't you ever talk about me." When Andrews asked him to expand on that, asked who was talking about him, after a pause, he said Crabtree. This moment, both the play and the interview blew up. It felt so fresh and exciting, people wanted to know more, and it gave idiots something to shout about to make sure they could still be heard. Folks immediately found Crabtree, who gave the mildest props to Sherman. He pointed out that Sherman hadn't done much else in the game, which is kind of a weird knock given the circumstances. Like, sure, he made the play of the game, but if he's so good, why didn't he just win it for them earlier? It was in the days that followed that we learned about the softball game, the snubbed handshake, the original bad blood. And when the Seahawks did what the Niners failed to do, winning a Super Bowl 2 weeks later, it made sure the topic wouldn't go anywhere just yet. Sherman referenced Crabtree in his autographs. He made a t-shirt to commemorate the play. He even went on Discovery Channel's TV show American Muscle, and immediately Crabtree became the focus.
It's a little something to it, it's much more of just I don't like to do, you know what I'm saying?
He very calmly added that the dislike went deep enough that Sherman wanted to see Crabtree for the rest of his career and choke him out. Crabtree didn't want to get into that, though. He and Sherman were different. Crabtree let his play do the talking, which, again, circumstances, weird flex. But anyway, according to Sherman, Crabtree let his mouth do some talking as well. Whether this went back to the charity event or something on the field, Sherman didn't expand on it, just left a touch of mystery to their relationship. But mystery or not, at that point their beef had blown up for everyone following. It reached such heights that even Taiwanese animators put together an explainer, and felt like the only way to correctly show this beef was with extremism and absurdity. I've been looking for confirmation, though, that the bathroom scene was at least rooted in some level of reality, because it's amazing. The trouble with this beef, though, was the gap between these players and these teams continued to grow. The Seahawks agreed with Sherman that he was the best, and made him the highest paid cornerback in the league. The Niners swapped success for gossip-generating performances. As San Francisco sunk to 500 and Seattle reached back-to-back Super Bowls, both of Sherman's partners in beef were suddenly gone. Crabtree moved on and spent 3 years with Oakland, another in Baltimore, and never crossed paths with Sherman at either stop. He did find a new cornerback to get into it with, though, so at least he had company. Ahead of the 2019 season, it looked like this beef would have one last hurrah. In a move that would have been shocking just a few years earlier, Sherman switched sides of the rivalry in 2018. Then, leading up to the following season, Crabtree returned to the division. He dodged questions about the prospect of facing Sherman again, but in the end, the showdown remained as just a question of what if. Sherman's move to San Francisco did give the beef some new flavors, though. He naturally got countless questions about the rivalry and spoke openly about his relationship with Harbaugh. He admitted that his boisterous rant, even though he called out Crabtree, hadn't really been targeted at Crabtree. The call-out was mainly intended for Harbaugh. Crabtree just kinda got caught in the crossfire. Now, that obviously isn't to say there was nothing going on between the players. Even in 2020, Sherman, in a fairly confusing way, said that his relationship with Crabtree was all over the place. Boiled down, good thoughts or bad thoughts, Sherman wasn't thinking about his former foe. Exactly how much beef these two had or have is hard to quantify. It's deeper than just two guys who got tired of facing each other. It certainly didn't help that Sherman fueled his play with spite, and Crabtree's head coach gave Sherman plenty of fuel to use. But had Crabtree's time in San Francisco continued once Harbaugh moved on, it would have been interesting to see where this relationship could have gone. What could have happened if the receiver didn't also serve as a beef proxy for his head coach? Hell, maybe that handshake could have even been completed. Or maybe they would have just found something else to do with their hands. But as quickly as we learned of it, the beef faded away. Whatever words passed between these guys were never meant for us to hear. We just got to sit back, enjoy whatever they decided to serve us, and no matter how good it tasted, the recipe would stay secret.
So how does beef end? How do teams return to just a more standard rivalry? Well, it took one team falling apart and no longer resembling the version of itself from the beef. That happened to the 49ers first, and we've got the full story of their collapse. If you made it this far, then I'll let you in on a little secret. This story isn't over because we still need to do a collapse for the Seahawks, which we're going to start production on soon. If you're a Patreon subscriber, you'll get a first look at that episode, plus a few other collapses later this year. For now though, enjoy Alex telling you the story of his favorite team falling apart.
In January 2011, the San Francisco 49ers were at rock bottom. Across the prior 8 seasons, they'd lost 82 games and missed the playoffs each year. Had a quarterback taken first overall whose career looked to be beaten and battered into oblivion. But then, they won the Jim Harbaugh sweepstakes. CEO Jed York and GM Trent Baalke miraculously landed the hottest coaching commodity around. And with Harbaugh captaining the Niners ship, their days as an NFL bottom feeder looked to be over, quick. He brought quarterback Alex Smith's career back from the dead with a passing attack that leaned heavily on wideout Michael Crabtree and tight end Vernon Davis. The power run game Harbaugh installed for tailback Frank Gore flourished behind an offensive line of maulers anchored by all-pro left tackle Joe Staley. But this was a team whose defense led the way and set the tone, and that all started with a front seven that oozed superstar talent. Interior D lineman Justin Smith was the heartbeat of the team and its MVP. The attention he demanded from opposing offenses freed up not only Aldon Smith, their sensational rookie pass rusher, but also planet Earth's top 2 inside linebackers, Patrick Willis and electric first-year starter Navarro Bowman. With Harbaugh pushing all the right buttons, they cruised through the regular season, racking up 13 wins and clinching the NFC West title plus a first-round bye. And though they won a thrilling back-and-forth game for the ages on this last-second missile from Smith to Davis, they also lost Ted Ginn to a knee injury in the game, and boy did they feel their return specialist's absence the next week. Facing the Giants in the NFC Championship game, the Niners had already rallied to overcome 1 turnover by replacement return man Kyle Williams and force overtime. In the extra frame, the Niners forced a punt that Williams fielded and again turned over, enabling a chip shot field goal to end their season in agonizing fashion. When the next season rolled around, Harbaugh led them to a 6-2 start and had Alex Smith playing exceptional ball, though a Week 10 concussion opened the door for backup Colin Kaepernick to shine, compelling Harbaugh to ride the hot hand and stick with the youngster. After again winning their division, Kaepernick thoroughly dominated the Packers in his first career playoff game, dissecting them through the air and running all over him on the ground, highlighted by this 56-yard touchdown that gave him the lead for good on a night where he rushed for the most yards by a quarterback in any game in NFL history. Then he went to Atlanta to win the NFC Championship game, earning a trip to New Orleans in Super Bowl 47. After falling behind 28-6 against a Ravens team coached by Harbaugh's brother, the Niners rallied to cut the deficit to 5 for their final possession, where they drove down to the doorstep of the goal line and NFL immortality. But on 4th and goal, Baltimore got quite handsy with Crabtree, and no flag meant another year of brutal heartbreak. Nevertheless, under the guidance of Harbaugh, who, according to Hall of Famer John Madden, had done the best coaching job in the history of the NFL in year 1, the team was in magnificent shape. They had an abundance of talent, all overseen by the khaki-wearing miracle worker, and nothing could get in their way. Well, nothing but the pride and ego of Niner management. In the 2012 NFL draft that preceded that Super Bowl run, Trent Baalke executed one of the most ghastly draft classes imaginable, with the 7 guys he picked combining to play just 42 games for the team, punctuated by first-round wideout A.J. Jenkins, who I will now show you every all-time pass the Niners ever threw to him. That's it. And that hideous draft class is what sparked the first real fissure in the Harbaugh-Baalke dynamic. But they were still set up beautifully and just had to take care of some off-season housekeeping to keep the train rolling. With Kaepernick now firmly entrenched as the team's starting quarterback, they flipped Smith to Kansas City for a couple second-round picks, while on the same day trading for grown man wide receiver Anquan Boldin. During the summer, Harbaugh and Jed York held talks to extend his contract, but York refused to cut the check necessary to get it done, clinging to the logic that he didn't want to pay Harbaugh like a Super Bowl winning coach because he hadn't won a Super Bowl. And while that's technically accurate, it's also pretty flawed logic. I mean, had the officials properly flagged Jimmy Smith at the end of Super Bowl 47 with the Niners then winning, would that somehow have made Harbaugh an inherently better football coach? So he'd need to keep proving himself. No problem. They again remained arguably the NFL's top team in 2013, but with Seattle edging them out for the division, San Francisco got to take a lovely January trip to Wisconsin featuring a wind chill reaching double digits below zero for wildcard weekend. But the California-based team pulled it out, and with a win the next week in Charlotte, Harbaugh became the only coach in NFL history to make the conference championship game in each of his first 3 seasons. During the following week's de facto Super Bowl in the Pacific Northwest, the Niners managed to take a second-half lead on this absurd backyard-style touchdown pass from Kaepernick to Anquan Boldin. Their next possession ended with a punt, but they should have kept the ball when the refs failed to enforce what clearly should have been a 15-yard penalty and automatic first down.
We see Lee get hit with that plant leg, and Mike Pereira, was that the proper call?
No, really, and I think Jim Harbaugh was making the point with Gene Steratore. If you hit the plant leg like they did here with the ankle turning over, that's roughing.
In Seattle's ensuing drive that shouldn't have happened in the first place, they came up short on a third down with 14:50 left to play. In a league with a 40-second play clock, the discombobulated Seahawks were somehow able to call a timeout 58 seconds later. This wasn't some run-of-the-mill bad call. It was an inexplicable administrative gaffe that removed a delay of game penalty from the equation. So on a drive that never should have existed, on a 4th and 7 that arguably should have been 4th and 12, Seattle parlayed their serendipitous fortune into scoring what was ultimately the game-winning touchdown. This battle royale also provided the first huge domino to fall in leading to San Francisco's demise when, midway through the 4th quarter, Navarro Bowman suffered this grisly knee injury while ripping the ball away from the Seahawks and clearly maintaining possession before getting dogpiled with that shredded knee, only to see the refs give the ball back to Seattle. It took about a month for the next gut punch, when reports started emerging of the 49ers having nearly completed a trade of Harbaugh to the Browns before getting nixed at the 11th hour. Now, Harbaugh can certainly be high maintenance, and his maniacal drive to win can be prone to rubbing his superiors the wrong way. But that's how he thrived, and despite all the winning it produced, York and Baalke apparently just preferred to have a yes man who never pushed back as coach. The very next week, a report surfaced that Harbaugh was losing the locker room. It was the beginning of a year-long, drama-filled whisper campaign throughout 2014 with seemingly weekly leaks to the media by Jed York and/or his minions engineered to try and make Harbaugh look bad. And with their all-world linebackers sidelined for the entire year after that horrific knee injury in Seattle, the misery was just beginning. Their very first game in brand new Levi Stadium saw them choke away a 13-point fourth quarter lead against the awful Bears when they let Jay Cutler toss 3 touchdowns in a 7-minute span. A month later, on the shitty Edward Jones Dome turf, the other half of their inside linebacking royalty succumbed to a toe injury and underwent season-ending surgery. Harbaugh somehow kept them afloat for a while, and they won 7 of their first 11 games. But then things spiraled wildly out of control, starting with a Thanksgiving night embarrassment against the Seahawks in a game so demoralizing that York felt compelled to take to social media to apologize for the product put forth on the field. In the wake of that tweet, the Niners fell to the 1-11 Raiders the next week, dealing a near fatal blow to their playoff hopes, which were shortly thereafter officially extinguished with a Week 15 loss in Seattle. Following that loss, management informed Harbaugh that he would not be returning in 2015, and before the season was out, he accepted an offer to return to Ann Arbor and coach his alma mater. Upon the conclusion of a distraction-infested 8-8 season, York crafted a statement saying the two sides were mutually parting ways, which was a lie. York fired him. Harbaugh himself would eventually confirm that indeed he was told he wouldn't be the coach anymore, and that the 49er hierarchy had left him. And York issued that pink slip with no coherent plan in place to replace him, as he and Baalke royally bungled the coaching search. They were on the verge of hiring Broncos offensive coordinator Adam Gase, with an arrangement of him as head coach and star incumbent D coordinator Vic Fangio remaining in place, but that deal blew up at the last minute when management gave Gase an ultimatum that D-line coach and longtime York favorite Jim Tomsula had to be his defensive coordinator. It didn't work, so they just made Tomsula the head coach. Less than 2 months into his tenure, utter disaster struck the organization to kick off a period where key 49ers were dropping off the roster like flies. March 10th, 2015. Six-time All-Pro linebacker Patrick Willis announces his retirement from the NFL at age 30, citing chronic foot problems. On the very same day, they watched the best back in franchise history and one of the very best of all time depart when Frank Gore signed with the Colts in free agency. And for the cherry on top, savage run-blocking left guard Mike Iupati signed with the division rival Cardinals. While Willis's stunning retirement was a monumental blow from out of nowhere, the one silver lining was the presence of promising youngster Chris Borland, who was coming off a tremendous rookie season in which he led the league in tackles over the second half of the season despite missing the final 2 games. So at inside linebacker, they were all set to welcome back Bowman from his devastating knee injury and plug Borland into Willis's spot until 6 days later, when the 24-year-old Borland also shockingly said goodbye to football amid long-term concerns of the repetitive head trauma inherent to his position. Not a month later, they lost Crabtree when he ventured across the bay to Oakland. And in May, Justin Smith officially hung up the cleats after 14 grueling years in the trenches. How crucial was Smith to the Niners' excellence of yesteryear? Well, in 2012, the Niners played 19 regular and postseason games. In the first 13, San Francisco's D was absolutely smothering. Then he tore his triceps off the bone in Foxborough in Week 15. He somehow returned to play in the playoffs with a giant brace, but across their final 6 games with Smith either sidelined or playing with one arm, the defense totally and completely fell apart. Just a couple weeks later, their O-line took another hit when right tackle Anthony Davis announced that he too was walking away from football at age 25. And to cap the offseason from hell, Aldon Smith was arrested for the 5th time in his 4 years as a Niner when he was charged with DUI, hit and run, and vandalism in August 2015. As spectacular as his pass rushing potential was, that was the final straw, and he was released just hours later. Then it came time to play football. With a coaching staff that was in completely over their heads, and Kaepernick playing through ailments that would require not 1, not 2, but 3 surgeries, they lost 6 of their first 8 games before more drastic change struck. Vernon Davis, the only tight end in NFL history with multiple seasons scoring at least 13 touchdowns, had now gone 19 straight games without finding the end zone, and was flipped to Denver the day after the Niners got steamrolled in St. Louis in Week 8. 2 days later, Tomsula officially announced he was benching Kaepernick. The keys to the offense were then handed to Blaine Gabbert, a nice guy who tries his hardest, but happens to be a remarkably incompetent NFL quarterback who no one should want in the same time zone as their team city unless it's as an opponent. Shockingly, he did not pull a rabbit out of the hat over the second half of the season, and down the stretch even led the team to a pitiful loss against Johnny honest-to-goodness Manziel. Just a couple years removed from annual contention, the team finished up a rotten 5-11 season and were among the dregs of the league, both offensively and defensively, going nowhere fast. York decided to take a half measure, firing Tomsula after his lone rancid season, but keeping Baalke in charge of the football operation. And with the current disastrous state of the franchise, their options for a new coach were limited. Baalke eventually settled on Chip Kelly, the deposed former Eagles coach. Kelly inherited a team with a quarterback situation in complete flux. Not only was Kaepernick recovering from operations to his shoulder, thumb, and knee, but he was very nearly traded to Denver, only to remain a Niner when he refused the pay cut the Broncos wanted him to take. With Cap unable to do much football work in the offseason, Kelly opened the 2016 season by again trotting Gabbert out as the Niners' starting quarterback, with the only reasonable explanation for his ongoing presence on an NFL 53-man roster being that he must know where all of the bodies are buried. A Week 1 win over NFL punching bag Jeff Fisher provided a false sense of competence before everything immediately came apart at the seams. They'd lose their next 4 games, a stretch in which Bowman suffered another awful injury, this time a ruptured Achilles that robbed the defense of their leader, and punctuated by a loss to the Drew Stanton-led Cardinals before Chip mercifully yanked Blaine Gabbert from the lineup and inserted Kaepernick. But spearheaded by the league's worst defense, the losses just wouldn't stop avalanching. That vaunted run D from the Harbaugh era, which didn't allow a single rushing TD for the first 14 games of his tenure, while in that time not allowing a single back to crack even 65 rushing yards on him, was now replaced by a softer than tissue paper unit that hemorrhaged yardage. Opposing backs feasted on the Bowman-less Niners as they became the only team to ever allow a 100-yard rusher in 7 straight games. With the NFL having also fully caught up to Kelly's unorthodox offensive principles, it was all part of a franchise record 13-game losing streak for the 49ers. Despite that, one of the very few players who did actually play relatively well was Kaepernick, literally an above-average passer in 2016. But throughout the season, he took a knee every week during the pregame national anthem to protest racial inequality and police brutality, and for that would become essentially blackballed by the league's owners. On January 1st, 2017, after ending their repulsive season with loss number 14, York fired his coach for the 3rd year in a row, this time finally sending Balky packing alongside him. The San Francisco 49ers under coach Jim Harbaugh had developed a blue-collar identity that fought like hell week in and week out, did a whole lot of winning, and should have continued to do a whole lot of winning. However, they suffered through some excruciatingly tough breaks, lost some aging foundational pieces, and endured the departures of some extremely talented players much earlier than anyone could have foreseen for a variety of reasons. But more than anything else, management just couldn't resist trying to fix something that was the furthest thing from broken. Winning wasn't good enough. They just had to win their way and get the credit for it too. And because of that, they ruined everything and sent the organization rapidly spiraling back to rock bottom.
Hey, thanks for watching, and special thanks to all of our top secret agents. If you want to be part of this crew, or if you want the first look at our first new episodes of Collapse in, I think, like a year and a half, then come join us on Patreon. You'll get something new every Monday, you'll get pretty good episodes, you'll get our podcast. There's a ton going on over there.